The unknown confrontation between two rock legends Dio and Ozzy Osbourne. The corridor hummed like an electrical nerve. A red recording bulb glowed above Studio A at the record plant, and the air smelled of solder, hot tubes, and yesterday's cigarette ghosts. Los Angeles, winter of 1983. The city wrapped in neon frost, its streets wet with the kind of rain that turns headlights into comets. Inside the building, sound was a weather pattern of its own. Guitar overcast, drum thunderheads, voices striking like static between earth and cloud. On the far end of the hallway, a door cracked open and spilled a sliver of silver-blue light. A man paused there, one hand on the frame as though steadying a ship that was still at sea inside him. Ozzy Osbourne, eyes rimmed with fatigue and defiance, listened. A riff like iron being born. A voice like a cathedral set ablaze. He knew that voice. He knew that band. A slow smile, half pride and half ache, touched his mouth. "Well, I'll be," he whispered to no one and to everyone he used to be. On a cold Los Angeles night in 1983, two voices that defined heavy metal destiny stood face to face, and the studio walls would remember their words forever. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world you're watching from, and if you love rock music stories, don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Darkness, hit the like button, and share this video with your friends who live for metal. The light dimmed as the door eased shut, returning the corridor to a hush that pulsed with bass through concrete. In Studio A, the mix engineer rolled back in his chair, eyes gritty, hands steady. Ozzy stood behind him, a shadow with a heartbeat. "Again," Ozzy said, softer than exhaustion should allow. He wasn't chasing a note. He was hunting a ghost, perfection perhaps, or some proof that he could still drag lightning down by the fistful. "Again," the engineer echoed, and the tape rolled. They were polishing bark at the moon, and the monitors rained teeth and fireworks. The chorus rose like a manic moonrise, and even then Ozzy's mind drifted to the other room where an older home was playing with new furniture. Sabbath. The proper noun had always felt like a season, like a weather system that could swallow counties. He remembered the first time they'd aimed a riff at the sun and watched people shadow their eyes to stare. He remembered Birmingham's factory smoke stitched to his clothes like a surname he couldn't launder out. "Takes good," the engineer said. "You want to ride the outro?" Ozzy's fingers drummed. He felt the hours like weights sewn into the hem of his coat. "Give me 10, he muttered, the words a compromise with fatigue. He stepped into the hallway, the door's seal breaking with a sigh, and the other sound came again. Riffs that walked with a straight back, drums that didn't blink, bass like an engine idling before a long, long night. He followed the sound the way a swallow follows a storm. Studio C's door was ajar. Inside, Tony Iommi's left hand was a machine-learning romance all over again on the fretboard, his right hand carving a geometry of inevitability. Geezer Butler hunched over his bass as if consulting scripture. Vinny Appis's sticks described circles that left scorch marks in the air, and at the mic, eyes closed, shoulders set, Ronnie James Dio sang like the roof was a sky and the sky was listening. Ozzy watched from the threshold. There are certain moments that split a life. The first time you leave. The first time you return, the day you realize both are the same road. Dio finished the take with a held note, a blade that left its mark where it cut, and the room exhaled. Someone laughed. A chair squeaked. A pen clicked. Then Ozzy said, "Evening, lads." Foreheads turned. The laugh trailed into silence that had a flavor. Copper, ozone, the bite of something about to spark. Tony lifted his chin, something like a smile moving through his eyes before it reached his mouth. Geezer straightened, surprise and the old warmth wrestling in his posture. Vinny set his sticks down carefully, like placing two hot knives on a safe plate. Dio opened his eyes last. Confidence lived in the angle of his jaw. "Ozzy," he said, polite, perfectly pitched, one syllable that somehow carried a thesis. Ozzy took a step in, offering a hand to the man who had stepped into his old house and rearranged the furniture so well the house seemed bigger. "Hell of a take," Ozzy said. "You rattled the light bulbs." Dio looked at the offered hand, assessed it, weighed it, not for germs but for meaning. He didn't take it. His mouth thinned into what could have been a smile on a colder planet. "We work late," he said. "Real music doesn't punch a clock." Tony's guitar went silent in his arms. The sort of silence you hold when a glass falls and you're still deciding whether you can catch it. Geezer's eyebrow rose a millimeter, the butler equivalent of a gasp. Vinny went shepherd still. Ozzy's hand hovered, then drifted back to his side. He tasted the old fire stir in his chest, that brittle, bright thing that had carried him through rooms with thrown bottles and crowds that wanted blood in tempo. He caged it gently. "You're not wrong," he said. "Tape doesn't care what time it is." Dio's eyes glittered. "Tape cares about truth." "Truth," Ozzy said, savoring the word. "That's one word for it." A phone rang in Ozzy's pocket, the tone slicing the tension with neat, modern disrespect. He glanced at the ID and softened without thinking. "Shaz," he said, stepping into the hall, lowering his voice. "Yeah, I'm here." "No, I'm fine. We're near done." I'll be home." He returned, the door clicking behind him, and he caught the end of Dio's smile. A tight, born-for-theater expression. "The famous Sharon," Dio said, musing. "Casual in the way a knife is casual when it's part of the cutlery set. Glad someone keeps you. Punctual." Ozzy considered the retort perched on his tongue. It would taste good now and like ashes for the next 10 years. He let it pass. "She calls because she cares," he said. "Not everyone gets that kind of miracle." The room bent a degree toward him at the word miracle. Like metal to a magnet you'd forgotten was under the table. Tony cleared his throat. "We're just roughing in a chorus," he said, to no one in particular, to everyone at once. "Could use a fresh set of ears." Dio didn't move. "We were working." Ozzy's smile turned wry. "You still are." The engineer in Studio C, an earnest young man with an overachiever's stubble, looked at Tony, then at Dio, then at the board as if it had suddenly sprouted a manual for social diplomacy. Geezer's fingers ran idly along the strings. The room shivered with a promise of E minor. "Ron," Tony said, the single syllable a peace offering, a reminder, and a warning in an accent that had forged steel before it forged riffs. "Play it." Dio held Ozzy's gaze for a long breath, then nodded with a sort of regal magnanimity. He turned back to the mic. "From the chorus," he said. "Roll." The tape swelled, and Dio stepped into it like a king taking the stairs 2 at a time. The melody leapt, coiled, expanded. Words fell with mythic inevitability. He didn't sing into the song. He enlarged it from the inside. Ozzy closed his eyes and heard the difference. Where he had been a fuse and a spark and a laugh echoed off brick, Dio was craft and arc and stained glass in a storm. It wasn't better or worse. It was a different kind of storm. When the take wound down, Ozzy clapped once, sincere, single, loud. "That'll tear the roof," he said. Dio returned to stillness, lifted his chin. "We aim higher," he said. "Roofs are for houses." Tony's mouth twitched. In another life, that would have made him laugh. Ozzy stepped closer, the floor remembering his footprints like old leather. "You think I don't work," he said, finally laying a hand on the table between them. A truce line, a frontier. "You think I scream and luck does the rest. I used to think the same thing about myself, you know. Then the crowds wouldn't let me die, and I had to learn what it was they heard." Dio's eyes narrowed, not with contempt now, but with appetite. "And what was that?" "The bit between the notes," Ozzy said. "The factory whistle stuck in a throat. The way a laugh sounds when it won't be fooled twice. I didn't study it. I survived it. That's different. It landed. It landed in the spine. Where art argues with biography and both lose." Dio glanced at Tony. The guitarist had that faraway gaze again, the one he got when a chord progression shook something loose in the attic of his head. Geezer's hand stilled. Vinny smoothed a thumb along a drumstick as though checking for splinters that were mostly metaphors. Dio turned back. "Technique matters," he said, but softer now, as if the syllables were negotiable. "Architecture matters. We build the corridors people walk through. Then give them a reason to walk," Ozzy said. "Give them a door with a handle that looks like them." Silence. Not cold now, curious. Tony put the guitar down. "We could argue till the cleaners throw us out," he said. "Or we could do what we do." Dio raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "Speak with music," Tony said. And the way he said music was the closest he'd ever come to a prayer. Geezer's mouth bent into a sideways smile. "He means," he added, "let's start a storm and see where it rains." Vinny tapped the hats twice, hissed like a match, and spread his hands. "Name it." Tony flicked to a shape his fingers could find in the dark. The first grind of paranoid. modified, leaner, more angular, a bridge thrown between yesterday and the next street. He nodded to Dio. Dio hesitated a heartbeat. The world waited with him. Then he sang the melody with his vowels carved into pillars, his consonants precise enough to slice rope. Can you help me? Occupy my brain. He lifted it, spun it, set it back down somewhere operatic the original had never walked. Ozzy laughed, not mockery, surprise. He clapped time on the edge of the board, his voice joining instinctively on the harmony line, low and ragged as a tire on gravel. For a few bars, they built a house that had 2 staircases and a single front door. The take ended in human sounds. Breath, a cough, a grin hitting oxygen. Your turn, Dio said, the challenge now edged with something like play. He tilted his head toward Tony. Heaven and hell, lose the crown, put on the leather. The riff arrived, holy as church bells in a steel mill. Ozzy stepped to the mic as if it were an old street where he still knew the cracks in the pavement. He didn't attempt Dio's architecture. He broke the line into pieces he could throw like bricks at a wall that deserved it. He growled the soft lines, chewed the hard ones, dragged a little dirt into the middle 8. Vinny pushed. Geezer prowled, Tony smiled, small, private. The grin of an inventor whose machine is still good in other hands. When the last chord blew out like a fuse, no one spoke for the length of a medium sin. Dio was the first to exhale. He touched the mic stand like a totem, eyes on some middle distance where scales and soul shook hands in a parking lot. You can't be me, he said, voice low. Ozzy shrugged. Never wanted to. And I can't be. Hersin wouldn't wish it on you. They both laughed then. Real laughter, that rubbed away the fingerprints on the moment and left it clean. Tony returned his guitar, to an E that felt like home and weather report. Children of the grave? He suggested, but his tone wore its caution openly. It was not a test. It was a memory offered with palms up. Geezer's thumb stitched a pulse that had been born worried and got louder when it loved you. Vinny lifted the sticks. The room leaned forward. Ozzy stared at the lyric sheet he didn't need, the one that was more talisman than text. He'd written it when the future had teeth and mothers counted the cost in packages of silence. The words had always felt like a letter he'd sent to the next decade without a return address. Dio stepped back from the mic. Your song, he said. Ozzy inhaled. The air tasted like old iron and new mercy. He started soft, a suggestion more than a statement. Midway through the first verse he heard, before he saw, Dio come in under him, not as a competitor but as a foundation, a second current braided into the wire. 2 fathers, the same dark prayer. Tony's eyes went bright and glassy. Geezer's mouth tightened. Vinny found that heartbeat tempo that makes a room into a chest cavity with windows. They moved together through the chorus, and something happened that you can't put on a chart. The ceiling seemed higher, the floor more faithful, the distance between what had been and what would be measured in bars instead of years. When they stopped, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of the thing no one names because it breaks the spell. Ozzy rested his forehead against the mic for a second. He had learned to count those seconds and not spend them all in one place. He looked at Dio. Peace? He asked. The word not a surrender, but a choice to stop losing. Dio weighed it, as artists weigh everything that might one day become a line. He nodded once. Peace, he said, and his voice put a period after it that didn't sound like an ending. They shook hands. This time the grip wasn't a ceremony. It was a bridge that knew both rivers. Somewhere down the hall a door opened and a late janitor pushed a cart past, humming a Motown line that once saved a life on a different night. The cart wheels squeaked. The building settled into its beams. The reel-to-reel spun down, the engineer smiling like he'd been allowed to witness a comet up close and had forgotten to be afraid. Tony pulled off his guitar and set it in the stand. We'll be at this till dawn if we let ourselves, he said. Dio glanced at the clock as if surprised that time still kept its job. Let's end on one more, he suggested. Ozzy tilted his head. Your call. Not a song, Dio said. A promise. He looked from Ozzy to Tony to Geezer to Vinny and back. We'll disagree, he said. We'll argue like steel and fire. But when the lights go down and somebody out there needs a way through the dark, he opened his hands. We build the corridor together. Ozzy's smile was tired and genuine, a man who had wrestled the day to a draw. Corridor, he repeated. I like that. They didn't play another note. They didn't need to. Some nights the last song is the one you don't record. Out on the street, the rain had stopped. Puddles kept their promises to neon. Ozzy stepped into the night with his jacket collar up and a phone warm in his pocket. Sharon's love was a lighthouse and sometimes a siren, and he'd learned the difference. Inside, Dio lingered at the mic, fingertips resting on cool steel, eyes shut as if tasting an afterimage. Two men who had shaped a genre in opposite directions walked the same hallway from different ends and met in the middle. The bulb above Studio C went dark. The corridor kept humming. Los Angeles had slept and woken again before anyone at the record plant remembered to turn off the hallway lights. The morning crew found coffee cups like fossils of a storm that had passed through. Word of what had happened spread quietly. Two voices of metal, once divided by ego, had shared a microphone until dawn. No one believed it until the tape was played back. Ozzy stood on the curb outside, coat collar high, cigarette trembling slightly in the chill. Sharon's car idled at the corner, her impatient drumming on the steering wheel keeping time with the hiss of the rain gutters. He wasn't thinking about the fight anymore. He was thinking about Children of the Grave, about the way Ronnie's harmony had wrapped around his own like light around smoke. Inside his chest, something had changed. Not healed exactly, but understood. He'd spent years proving he didn't need Black Sabbath. Now he realized that proving had built another cage. Sharon rolled down the window. "Are you coming home, love, or do you want to marry the pavement?" He laughed, the sound rough but alive. "Coming," he said, flicking the cigarette into a puddle that sizzled like applause. Across town, Dio sat in the back booth of Cantor's Deli, a notepad open beside a half-eaten sandwich. The words "new song idea" were scrawled at the top. Beneath a single phrase, "two fires, same flame," he tapped the pen. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the new man wearing another's crown. He felt like a craftsman who'd met another smith in the forge and realized the metal sang the same under both hammers. He closed the notebook, smiling to himself. "Soul," he murmured. Maybe that's what he meant. A week later, Tony Iommi sat in his living room, the reel from that night spinning slowly. The playback crackled, raw and imperfect, two unfiltered voices meeting somewhere between rebellion and requiem. Geezer sat opposite him, eyes distant. "You know," Geezer said, "that's history on there." Tony nodded. "Yeah, but I don't think either of them cares about history anymore." He stopped the tape, leaving the last note hanging like incense. Years later, 2010, the church was full of soundless thunder. Wreaths lined the steps, fans gathered outside in denim and tears. Inside, Ozzy stood near the front pew, his sunglasses unable to hide the storm in his eyes. He'd been asked to speak. When he reached the microphone, his hands trembled, not from age, but from weight. "Ronnie taught me something the night we met again," he began. "He taught me that music isn't a weapon. It's a bridge. He was better than me in ways I couldn't be, and I was what he could never be, and that was the point. Between us, somewhere in the middle, was the real heartbeat of heavy metal." He paused, exhaling through grief and gratitude. Heaven and Hell wasn't just his song, it was the truth of us. Two halves of the same fire, the crowd stood. No applause, just the kind of silence that honors noise by missing it. Outside, the sky over Los Angeles was the same cold gray it had been that night in '83. Reporters said Ozzy smiled through the tears as the bells tolled, that he looked upward as if hearing the last harmony echo from somewhere above the rafters. Later that evening, he returned to his studio. On the console sat the old reel labeled Children of the Grave, two voices. He threaded it, pressed play, and let the hiss and hum fill the room. Ronnie's voice soared. His own followed. For a few minutes, time folded neatly in half. Two men who had once fought for the soul of metal were singing again, one from memory, one from the beyond. Ozzy whispered, almost reverent, "Peace, brother." "Still got it." He leaned back, closed his eyes, and smiled as the tape wound to its soft, perfect end. If this story touched you, subscribe to Voices of Darkness, hit like, and share it with friends who still believe music has a soul. Because legends don't die, they just change key.